A Tall and Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 7, Good Bunny. Ashlynn had a hard time sleeping that night. Finding a place to sleep wasn't the hard part. It was keeping her nerves in check. Staring at the ceiling, her heart pounded and throbbed in her chest. Was it the fact she would be smuggling a family of 4.5-inch tall people into her apartment? Was it just seeing them again? Was it about meeting Soren's daughter? Ashlynn sighed and rolled over from beneath the covers to stare at the wall instead. There was a tenseness that almost felt unsettled and disheartened. She still couldn't believe that Soren had a kid, that he had fallen in love with someone and had a kid with them. Did it bother her? No. At least, she didn't think so. It wasn't jealousy. She was genuinely happy for Soren. Perhaps it served as a reminder that time had passed. But why was that feeling there? Was this a fear, an anxiety that they weren't as close as they once were, and that they couldn't achieve that same closeness again? Nonsense. They talked like not a day had passed between them. He stepped onto her hand with no hesitation like they used to. Was it because he was in a different stage of life? He had a relationship, a wife, and then had a daughter. Ashlynn hadn't done any of those things. But had she wanted them? Yes. Yes, she did. But not with anyone she knew in her day-to-day life since leaving that old apartment. She didn't want to think about any of that now. She needed her rest and for her nerves to settle down. Deep breath after deep breath, Ashlynn finally managed to drift off to sleep, filled with dreams of looking for something yet never being able to find it. She searched the floors and the walls and every room in a labyrinth-like house that changed constantly. The abrupt sound of the alarm going off jolted her out of her deep slumber. Her brow was lined in a light, cold sweat. Her body felt on edge. It wasn't the first time this dream haunted her sleep, but hopefully it would be the last. Ashlynn pulled herself out of bed, feet hovering just above the floor for just a few seconds. She went through her mental checklist. Tennis shoes, comfortable pants, and a t-shirt seemed suitable for a moving day. Here we go, thought Ashlynn, as she stood and readied herself for the day. The drive was quick back to the old apartment complex, and the day was slightly overcast. There was a weather prediction for heavy rain and thunderstorms later, but for now the day was bright and promising. Before making it over, she stopped by the store and picked up a few odds and ends that she thought might be useful. She bought a couple of totes with dividers and supporters on the inside to keep the borrowers' things separate and organized, and even invested in a small step ladder, as Soren suggested. She also purchased a few knickknacks, like safety pins, thin cloth for curtains, or spare fabric, and even a few pieces of dollhouse furniture, which she determined she would probably have to justify getting them. Ashlynn hoped it wouldn't be too much, and that they wouldn't see the furniture as disrespectful or her overstepping her bounds. Moving was stressful enough without having to throw your entire life in a box by a giant. Ashlynn stepped out of the car, bringing the box with her, and made it back to the lockbox at the front of the property, noting that there were several new dumpsters at the end of the road, as well as 2 new pieces of heavy machinery. With one shaky, deep breath, she unlocked the box and let herself into the old apartment for the last time. The early morning light cast a cool glow against the walls and illuminated the rooms. She could see where her heels from the day before had kicked up a thin layer of dust on the floor. The floor creaked under each step as she made her way into the back room. She looked around the room, seeing the corner that Soren had mentioned the day before. She didn't want to sneak up on them, a laughable thought that she could sneak up on a borrower at her size. Ashlynn stepped up to the wall and knocked 3 times. Soren? Ray? Dorian? Good morning. I just wanted to let you know I was here. Are you awake? Called Ashlynn. raising her voice only slightly above her normal speaking level. There was nothing, not a sound. A flash of concern washed over her. Had they already left? No, they wouldn't have left. Perhaps they were still asleep. If that were the case, perhaps she should sit and wait until they made contact. She was about to make herself comfortable on the hardwood floor when she heard the sound of slight scraping coming from above her head. She turned her eyes upward slowly to an air vent grate to see the ceiling trim where the walls met the opening outward, and to catch a glimpse of two familiar faces cast in shadow. It was Soren and Ray. The moment they made eye contact with one another, their smiles contagiously spread to Ashlynn as she looked up to them. With the trim successfully out of the way, Ray hooked up some kind of line and began to belay himself down the wall, hanging upside down like Spider-Man. "Morning, Ashlynn," called Ray as he descended the line. "Be careful, Ray. Right side up," instructed Soren as he stepped away from the opening in the ceiling. Ray looked back up the line but continued to lower himself the wrong way. "I'm being careful," he called. Ashlynn chuckled and walked up to Ray just as he made it to her eye level. "You are quite the aerial acrobat," grinned Ashlynn. "I've been practicing," bragged Ray. "I've also been working on some new things like this. Watch!" Ray continued to pinch the line with his feet as he began to pull something from his back. It was a mess of paper clips and wire ties, but it evidently was something more, as Ray clipped it onto the belt he was wearing and hooked his line through it. Then, without warning, he let go of the line. Ashlynn's heart leapt into her throat, and she instinctually threw her hand a few inches below Ray, but he did not fall. He stayed put there on the line. "Had you worried, huh?" grinned Ray mischievously. "It's a placeholder if you get tired on the line while you're climbing. You can also put it on the line and stand on it if you..." One of the paper clips turned suddenly, letting the pinched line slip through the device. Ray fell only 3 inches from where he was on the line to where Ashlynn had placed her hand, landing on his back with an abrupt thud. "Oof!" He winced. He reached up and rubbed the back of his neck as he rolled over on Ashlynn's palm, so he was now crouched. Ashlynn, on the other hand, took a second to exhale with relief as her heart continued to pound. "Still working out the bugs?" she asked, keeping her voice low in hopes Soren wouldn't scold Ray for not listening and being reckless. Ray sat back, legs folded, as he looked up at Ashlynn, wrinkling his nose at her. "Okay, so it's not completely sound. I'll get it, though. It works most of the time. I need more stable ties," said Ray, already problem-solving his invention. Ashlynn's fingers curled instinctually upward as Ray pulled his creation from the line and began fiddling with it, working as if he weren't being held. "Well, we can brainstorm some ideas if you want," encouraged Ashlynn. "You've got a lot of good things going. Maybe you just need a tighter seal on the line." "Exactly," beamed Ray. Ray, where are you? And why is your bag so heavy? Did you pack your borrowing bag with things you actually need, or did you just pack all of your crazy..." Ray and Ashlynn looked up at the hole in the ceiling to see Dorian dragging a bag up to the ledge. Dorian halted and stared down. His body almost immediately stiffened the moment he made eye contact with Ashlynn. Her jaw slackened as she saw the teenage borrower. She thought Ray had changed, but Dorian had definitely matured more physically. His jaw was stronger, and he was slightly broader. For a moment, Ashlynn could almost see the form of his father, from what little she saw of him, as he stood there looking down at her and his youngest brother. "Dorian? Wow, you've gotten so much taller. How are you?" asked Ashlynn. Dorian glanced away nervously before clearing his throat. I'm fine. You?" asked Dorian. "I'm doing really well," smiled Ashlynn. "Is that something I could take down for you?" Dorian let the bag drop from his hand to the ledge. "Sure. Yeah, sure," he said as he backed away. "I'll, go and get some of the other bags." Ashlynn watched in partial confusion as Dorian vanished back into the shadows of the walls. She felt a pang hit her that she wasn't expecting. Was he afraid? Had she done something wrong? "Don't mind him," said Ray's soft voice as he pushed himself up to stand on Ashlynn's palm. "He's been acting weird lately." Ashlynn was about to pry further when she saw Soren step back up to the ledge, take the line in his hands, and begin sliding down, belaying down the wall effortlessly. The devices in his hands evidently helped him descend the line by protecting his palms. But that wasn't what caught Ashlynn's eye. It was the pack attached to his back and the mess of auburn-kissed hair that was in it. It wasn't until Soren made it all the way to the ground that Ashlynn could better see how the device on his back was constructed. The pack was like a backpack, slinging over his shoulders, but it tied in the front across the top of his chest and again at his waist. The moment he touched down, he knelt and began undoing the straps, slipping out of them methodically. Ashlynn subconsciously sat down very slowly to not create any sudden movements, while Soren sat the pack on the ground and pulled out a roly-poly toddler, with wavy brown hair kissed with the slightest auburn, who barely stood around an inch and a half tall. Maisie clutched her bunny tight and waited for Soren to finish undoing the straps, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. Soren's heart was practically pounding out of his chest. Much like the first time he met Ashlynn, there was uncertainty crushing his chest, compressing it from all sides. He was nervous Maisie would have a bad reaction to seeing Ashlynn. He had prepped her the night before and had been prepping her all morning, but this would be Maisie's first time seeing a human. At the moment, she didn't seem to notice. However, they were now on the ground, and Maisie was starting to look around. It didn't take long for the toddler to notice the massive figure of Ashlynn, who was sitting a few feet away. The toddler's eyes widened, and she instinctively stepped forward towards Soren's outstretched arms, eyes locked on this new, much larger entity. Ashlynn, this is Maisie, my daughter," said Soren as he took a couple steps forward cautiously. She started to whimper when Soren bounced her and smiled soothingly, standing as tall as he could as he pointed to Ashlynn. "It's okay, Maisie. This is Ashlynn. You remember? Ashlynn. She's very tall, isn't she? Can you wave?" prompted Soren as he waved to Ashlynn. Maisie didn't wave. Soren looked up at Ashlynn, apprehensive of what he would see. What was Ashlynn thinking about his daughter? What if they didn't like one another? Soren's mind was racing so fast that he almost missed the sparkle in Ashlynn's eyes as she met Maisie's gaze. "Hi, Maisie," said Ashlynn softly as she brought up her other hand and gave a small wave. "It's nice to meet you." Soren could feel Maisie's heart beating quickly and her grip tightening on his shirt. They were at a crossroads. He knew it. He wished he weren't nervous, knowing that Maisie could probably sense it. "Soren, she's beautiful," smiled Ashlynn. It was then that Ashlynn pointed to Maisie's bunny. "And who is this? Is that your friend?" Soren almost answered first when, by some miracle, he watched as Maisie nodded subtly, mouth open slightly in awe. "Can I see?" asked Ashlynn. Maisie, who had kept Bunny tied to her chest, barely held out the cotton ball creature before pulling it back close to her chest. "That is an awesome friend you have. Does he have a name?" Sadly, Bunny was still a little hard for Maisie to say, and, instead, she leaned into Soren's shoulder. "Now, none of that. We're not shy around our friends," said Soren, a smile of relief washing over him. "His name is Bunny. Maisie, can you say Bunny?" Maisie didn't respond, but instead leaned back up and began stroking the cotton creature's ears. "That's a great name. commented Ashlynn. "Hey, Maisie," called Ray, who had walked over to the tips of Ashlynn's fingers and had laid down so his shoulders and his head dangled over the ledge. Soren and Ashlynn were so hyper-focused on the toddler that Ray had made himself comfortable and silent until now. The sound of Ray's voice immediately captured Maisie's attention. She began looking around for the source of the voice until Ashlynn lowered him down to just a few inches above the ground. Ray sat up and dangled his legs off of the edge of Ashlynn's fingertips and held his arms out. "What do you think about this, Maisie?" asked Ray. Maisie, seeing him, immediately began squirming and holding her hands out for Ray. Soren's heart was pounding, but perhaps this was a good thing. He lowered Maisie to the ground and watched, astounded, as she dared to take a few steps forward toward Ashlynn. Ashlynn, in response, lowered her hand completely so the back of her hand was on the ground. Maisie, obviously conflicted, looked back to Soren, who joined her at her side and walked up to Ray with her. "See, Maisie, Ashlynn is good. See? Good," said Ray, reaching over and patting the tip of Ashlynn's finger. The toddler, obviously putting together the pieces of some puzzle in her mind, reached out beside Ray with a hand that held her bunny and mimicked the motion Ray had just done. "Good," cooed Maisie, as she turned to Ray and Soren for approval and praise, two things that happened immediately. "That's right, Maisie. Good. Ashlynn is good," praised Ray. Soren knelt and stroked his daughter's back reassuringly. The four of them remained motionless for several minutes before Soren broke the silence. "Ray, do you have everything packed and ready?" asked Soren. Ray nodded. "Yes, Soren, I have everything packed," replied Ray as he tugged a few stray strands of hair behind Maisie's ears. "Then would you take Maisie around the room and keep clear of this area while I help Ashlynn load out everything? We need plenty of time to make it back so we can check out where we'll be moving to," asked Soren. Ray sighed and looked up to Ashlynn before nodding. "Sure thing. Come on, Maisie, let's go on our walk," said Ray as he hopped off of Ashlynn's fingers and picked Maisie up. Together, they began walking to the other side of the room, all along the baseboard. It was then that Ashlynn and Soren simultaneously heaved a sigh of relief. Soren, knees weak, let himself stagger over to Ashlynn's hand and sat beside it. "I think she likes you," he breathed, a disbelieving smile curling across his face. "You think so?" asked Ashlynn in the same breathy tone. Soren chuckled and nodded. "Absolutely," he grinned. "Now, we have some packing to do, don't we?" "Yes, we do," she replied. Soren stood after a moment and climbed onto Ashlynn's hand. She made sure he was stable before standing and adjusting the ladder to climb up to the wall. Ashlynn set down Soren and took off the vent grate to begin packing up their home. Ashlynn was methodical and delicate with each thing she was directed to grab and placed each item into the crate, keeping the room separate as necessary. She didn't question the different items she put in, nor who they belonged to. What mattered was that she was helping, and that they were together, working together like they had done so many years ago. The box was finally loaded, and it was time to leave. Soren stared at their once fully formed home, and then stared down into the room below to the box Ashlynn had packed. It was amazing that everything they owned could fit into one simple crate. A smaller box on top would be their temporary hiding place when they were outside, but thankfully, they wouldn't be in there for too long. Soren stared out one last time to their home before turning back to Ashlynn. She waited patiently as Dorian did one final walkthrough with Soren. "Ready to go?" Soren asked, finally with a sigh. Dorian nodded slowly and descended the line, and Soren was not far behind. Soren could not help but pause as he did. There was one more thing he was forgetting. He ducked back into the walls and along the beams to a small shelf formed where the joists of the roof met the rest of the apartment. He remembered a trinket a small silver locket that he kept there when he needed a moment. The image is inside, or slightly worn and poorly sketched, but it was important he keep this thing. Goodbye, he muttered, to no one but the memories that remained. With the locket in tow, Soren made his way back out of the walls and descended the line. Everyone else was already packed and prepped. Soren descended the line and touched down a few feet from the box they would be hiding in. Ray, Dorian, and Maisie were already inside. "Ready?" asked Ashlynn, and Soren nodded. "Let's go," he said, leaving behind yet another home he had grown to love while gaining another. With that, they set out to the next chapter of their lives.